We have in the studio with us today Professor Jane Kelsey from Auckland University. Jane has been here in Nelson talking about the TPPA, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Jane, welcome to Nelson.
Lovely to be here.
You had a great turnout at the talk that you were discussing what this was meaning for Nelsonians or for New Zealanders last night at Lambretta's. Were you surprised by the amount of people that turned up?
Not really, because when I've been here before talking in Nelson, there's always a really good turnout, and I think that's one of the special things about Nelson,
yes,
that you've got a community of people who are interested, intellectually engaged and care. And so it was great, and it was a great venue, and of course we had the cartoon competition that we have been running around the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement.
Right.
We had the exhibition there, which I understand is now going to be moving across to the library.
Great. Now, Jane, it's quite a subject, this TPPA, and after listening to you last night, it's very worrying. These documents that you're talking about have been leaked, otherwise we'd probably know nothing about it.
Yeah, this is a kind of a project that makes people's eyes glaze over, and that's really dangerous, because what we've got is 11 countries currently, including the US and New Zealand, negotiating a deal that they are calling a gold standard set of rules for the 21st century that will govern what governments can do behind their borders. So think of an external group of governments getting together, deciding how we should operate, what our choices can be for the future, and everything ranging from medicines to the internet to ownership of farmland to the kind of foods that we can eat, and rules that are designed essentially to maximise the profits of corporations and commercial interests without any real engagement with the challenges we'll face in the 21st century, and all being done in secret so we don't get to see it till the deal is done.
This is a real worry. It means that we're kind of powerless, and hopefully our government will make the right decision, but you know, are they listening to what we want within, I mean, obviously you're out there, you're going around, you're educating people on what you know of this particular agreement. How is the response by our government officials to what you're saying?
The government simply says, trust us, we know what we're doing, we are listening to your concerns, but really it's fine, don't worry, we will make sure, even though you won't get to see what we've negotiated, that your concerns are all addressed. And I think trust us is not good. Trust us has not left us in a good place for the last 30 years. Deal making of the kind that we've seen the current government having a particular penchant for, whether it's the Hobbit or the Sky City Casino, has not been shown to be in our interests. We have a Prime Minister who, if he is leading the deal making, you know, has a history as a foreign exchange trader. He does deals without a lot of accountability and without a lot of balance of the factors that will be taken into account. And so I think we need to demand not only openness of the texts before they are signed off so that we can do a proper analysis, but we need to say that the basic tenets of this agreement, which are driven by commercial and foreign policy interests, need to be balanced with the whole range of other objectives that we have: health, conservation, ecosystems, just basic economic development, jobs, not the interests of Fonterra and a handful of others.
Now, there's no guarantees in this agreement that Fonterra will benefit greatly from this agreement anyway. There seems to be, it kind of sounds one-sided really. It sounds like America is designing this, the corporates are designing it so they can move in here and dictate terms to us. And also legally, they're supported by it, and our own laws will cease to exist because the agreement will rule over and above.
Yeah, there are several important elements of this that make it much more concerning than just an ordinary piece of domestic legislation. You have these negotiations that take place behind closed doors, and even though there's 11 countries, there's basically 10 plus 1. The US not only has more economic and foreign policy leverage, but the way that they make treaties, the Congress effectively has a veto over it. So their legislative process can say, this is not good for us. Our process of treaty making here is basically signed off by the cabinet. And so we have this really massive potential straitjacket for our governments in the future, irrespective of what electoral platform they've been assessed by in our democratic processes. And it's the cabinet that has the say on it. But then the agreement itself becomes enforceable not only by those other governments in offshore tribunals, but by the foreign investors who are given special rights, even above New Zealand businesses, and they can enforce those in offshore tribunals that sit in secret, that have no rules of precedent in the way that our domestic courts do, no appeal structure, and worse, the judges are drawn from the legal community, and one week they might be representing the investors, and the next week they might be sitting in judgment on the investors, and then the week after they go back to representing the investors. And
so there can be a great conflict of interest arising because of this particular agreement. It's leaving the doors wide open for corruption.
Well, they're kangaroo courts in a way, and they've become widely discredited. Even the OECD has now been putting out reports saying that the process is really problematic. Several countries are looking at trying to withdraw from these. Australia has actually said in these Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement negotiations, they will not agree to the investors having these powers. Yet, they're the only one. New Zealand has said if it's part of the trade-off for getting the slightest whiff of access for New Zealand dairy into the US, that's fine.
Have you approached Chris Finlayson, the Attorney General, about your concerns?
Whenever we've approached any of the National Party people with portfolios that are affected, it gets referred through to the Trade Minister, Tim Grosser. And we had a letter that was signed middle of last year by a number of jurists here and internationally in other TPP countries, but we had former Speakers of the House and Attorney General, several former Cabinet Ministers, former Supreme Court Judge, former Privacy Commissioner and so on, all expressing concern about overriding our domestic courts by these foreign tribunals that can award billions of dollars of damages and cost multi-millions dollars in legal fees. And the government just sort of shrugs its shoulder. Even the really highly publicised effects for Pharmac, our medicines purchasing agency. Pharmac is seen to have saved us about $6 billion over the last decade and a bit. And it's seriously threatened by this agreement. The Health Select Committee has twice declined to have a hearing of information evidence from experts who can give evidence because there's a leaked text on this. It went to a vote, and the government majority on the Select Committee voted it down. So they're not prepared even to have an informed discussion in the Parliament. The government wants to shut this off until the deal's done.
It's rather scary stuff, isn't it?
Well, especially because they're planning to sign it in October. That makes it urgent for people to get an understanding of the issues. There are some communities that have been very active. The public health community has been out there not only in relation to Pharmac but also tobacco and the threats the tobacco company are already making on plain packaging. And if they had this in their toolkit, you can guarantee that they would be launching major disputes against New Zealand seeking damages in these offshore tribunals. But the internet industry, concerned about the copyright and internet restrictions on not just our access to open internet, but the impacts on innovation. If we're going to have any economic future in this country, it'll be in the areas of innovation. So those will be impacted upon. Libraries, the Consumers Institute, all of those have a great network called fairdeal.net.nz.
Yep.
So they've been campaigning. But ordinary people haven't yet really grasped how significant this will be for our futures.
No, it's quite a worry. Now, I see that there's this great magazine. It's a great read. Where can people get hold of something like this if they wish to know more?
There's a lot of resources that have been developed on the website for It's Our Future, all one word, itsourfuture.org.nz. So there's the magazine, which includes some serious bits, some fun bits, some of the cartoons and photos, and some of the international developments as well, with other countries involved in this, and a number of other information sheets. And there's also going to be a variety more activities for people to engage in, so people can play their own part in saying, it's our future, it's not their 21st century, it should be our 21st century, and we should control what happens in our future.
One of the things I think most Kiwis are happy about is the fact that we have a rather transparent, well, we think we have a rather transparent political system. This is actually completely foreign, the fact that all this secrecy is surrounding major decision making around trade and commerce in New Zealand. This is a real concern, especially with mining, for example. You used an example about people who companies coming in and doing a bit of experimental testing in certain areas, and if the government rejects them or ceases to do the mining as they have done in Golden Bay area, that can then turn into a legal case on lost potential earnings by that mining company under this agreement.
Yeah, one of the dilemmas that we have is when people think about this as a trade and commerce kind of agreement, and it's not. Right. It affects everything in our lives, but it's driven by the commercial interests. It's basically about maximising profitability of foreign investors' activities, whether they are located here or they're located offshore. And when it comes to mining, what I referred to as the rights of the investors to sue, we know the investment chapter thankfully has been leaked, so we know what is in that, and we know that it will give US investors in particular special rights to sue the New Zealand government in these offshore tribunals, not for breach of our law or not even for breach of the contract with the government, but there's a special rule ironically called fair and equitable treatment, which is basically about not changing the rules on the investor after they made an investment in ways that substantially affect their profits. Now that's what the tobacco companies are complaining about with plain packaging. But what we see is even if you've got an initial process like an initial permit for experimentation or an initial evaluation of what the potential mining merits are of an area, and the government decides it's not going to proceed with that, those companies are using these mechanisms to sue the governments as if the mining licence had been granted and the profits into the future. And with these claims, which are now growing exponentially because it's become a bonanza for the international law firms, 70% of those cases have been around natural resources and mining, and they have involved terrible situations like Chevron's devastation of the Amazon basin, Occidental's operations in Ecuador. There's a case that a US company is now bringing against Quebec over a moratorium on fracking. So we're seeing just constantly the companies using these, firstly to harass governments, to threaten these expensive, long drawn out disputes to get them to back off,
Right.
what we call the chilling effect, and if governments proceed, then to sue them. In some places, it's involved governments' responses to climate change. For example, the closing down of coal-fired fire stations, or in Germany, one case after the Fukushima disaster, where they decided that they were going to terminate some of the nuclear power projects. And so really sound government responses are fettered by these extraordinary powers given to foreign investors.
Right. And we'd be seeing that here,
Well,
undoubtedly.
We are lucky. Many of these agreements already exist that give foreign investors these powers.
Right.
We don't have many of them, and we don't have them with the US. And it's the US companies that are litigious. They use these agreements very aggressively, and we can expect that our future will be tied up in knots. You know, we think we can change things by changing a government. Well, this locks the door on electoral democracy.
Right. So it is a real concern. Now, last night it was suggested that people go and see their MP, talk to their MP, tell their MP what they feel about it. Is that what do you think that's a proactive approach?
We've got lots of things that we'd like people to do, and we'd like people to feel confident enough to say, we don't know about this because it's secret.
Yeah.
This is what we've been able to gather. We want to know what you, as MPs, know about it. We want to know what you're going to do about it. We want you to push for it to be open, and we want you to answer some of these questions for us. If you're our representatives and you're going to stand at the next election, we want to know that you're going to be able to deliver on your promises, whatever political party you are. And so we have some resources on the It's Our Future website. But there are lots of other things, people just ringing the talk back, or writing letters to the editor, or doing things that raise the profile of the issues. There are other things that we've been encouraging people in the medical professions, or people who are teachers. PPTA has been very concerned about charter schools and the public-private school systems.
Yeah.
We know that when the contracts go wrong, that we end up with a mess, and that we end up paying, and the kids end up paying, and the teachers end up paying. If the hands of the government are tied by threats from those who have these contracts, then again the options to address them go down the gurgler.
Right.
And so it's important, that teachers start asking these questions. People who are concerned in local communities about the mining issues, getting the local governments. Auckland City has a resolution now saying that they will only support this agreement if it meets a whole series of conditions. So we need the local councillors to understand how this will constrain what they can do. So going to see your local councillors, there's a whole lot of those things people can do.
So local body is a good way to start.
Absolutely.
It's a shame there weren't that many councillors. I think Mike Ward was the only one there last night. So very, very sad that they didn't take the opportunity to hear you speak.
I think they, in local government, are nervous. One, they don't know enough. Two, they have a mixture now of commercial interests as well as representative obligations for communities. And unless they have to engage with the question, I think they'll probably leave it parked to one side. So we do need to have Local Government New Zealand as the overriding body also putting these issues on the table. But it has to start local, and if it can start in the Nelson area, then that would be brilliant.
That's right. Now, there's not a lot of time, of course. It's all happening in October. So people need to get cranked up, get educated about what this is all about, and make their decision as to whether they support it or want to do something about not supporting it.
Yeah, October is when they have set down to sign it, which is when all the leaders will be together in Indonesia for the APEC meeting. We're not sure that they're actually going to get it into a state to do that, but they will at least have a Clayton signing that suggests that they've got it sorted. That means the Cabinet will probably make decisions about trade-offs much earlier than October. So the pressure is on not to leave it until close to the time,
right,
but to start building the momentum again now. We had really good campaign in November and December because the round before last was actually appropriately in the Sky City Casino or in the hotel next to it in Auckland, a place where all good deals are made. So we need to rebuild that momentum, and there's lots of good resources, videos and so on that people can look to get educated, get out there and start putting the pressure on.
One last question. With what you know about this agreement, is there any real benefits for New Zealand that you can so far see in this agreement?
We don't have any clear understanding of what the government says the gains will be. It's said it will walk away from the table if there is not substantial access into the US markets for our dairy. Now that's not going to happen. Political reality in the US means it won't happen. Japan is now suggesting that they would like to join, and New Zealand saying, oh well, therefore we'll get access to Japan as well. Well, I do a lot of work on this in Japan and that going to happen either. What the real risks are the government will, simply for the sake of cementing this deal, because all these deals have to be good and it's a photo opportunity for the PM with Obama and it's a trophy on the shelf, that they will sign it and they will pretend that there are gains for New Zealand in it, at the same time as jeopardising the public health system, jeopardising access to the internet and innovation, jeopardising our control over what foreign companies do in our country, jeopardising our ability even to deal with the next financial crisis by tying our hands and being able to re-regulate the banking system. And so there are so many risks. And WikiLeaks did a lovely little number a while back where the lead negotiator said, we have to deflate expectations that this is going to be an El Dorado for New Zealand. Well, it's not going to be an El Dorado, and we have to get the government to confess that it is doing this as part of an ideological campaign rather than in the interests of New Zealand.
So if this does go ahead, I guess New Zealanders can be guaranteed that everything will go up in price. There'll be no more parallel imports for a start, so the warehouse might be empty.
The warehouse has been expressing its concern because, as you say, parallel imports is one of the things that will go. Medicine prices will either increase or there will be less availability for medicines because what the pharmaceutical companies will get will increase and the government budget is going to have to stretch further. We will have increased costs for businesses and increased costs for libraries and universities and schools through the changes to the internet laws. There's a whole range of areas where the impacts will hit ordinary families' budgets.
So everyone will be affected in some way.
Absolutely.
Professor Jane Kelsey, thank you very much for your time today. It's been really informative. Thank you.
Pleasure.